This talk's going to be about a couple of things. Some folks didn't understand what Doha was. Doha is in Qatar. They've had the 18th meeting on climate change called Council of the Parties 18. Unfortunately, nothing happened, and it's very difficult to get consensus. The U.S. is an observer at these meetings because we did not sign the Kyoto Protocol, as you're all well aware. And the reality is we'll probably continue to list forward. But this is going to be about what government can do, what you can do, and frankly, what a lot of us could do. It's not all gloom and doom. Last week somebody asked about natural gas. Natural gas has half the emissions of coal. Here's the good news: 173 coal plants were not built in this country. They were planned to be built in the last decade. And 125 coal plants are being early retired. So believe it or not, the United States, which did not sign the Kyoto Protocol, has reduced its carbon footprint more than any other developed country. That's the reality. And that's through economics. So over in New Jersey, there are a couple of coal plants that are idle. And I'm not going to get a debate in gas fracking. We can talk about that offline. The reality is we are using more renewable energy and more natural gas. Nuclear power is pretty stagnant at 105 operating plants. But coal is being reduced and will be further reduced over the course of this decade, and that's a good thing. So what my Holy Grail has been for 2 decades is a price for carbon, a price for pollution. Something that we invented on Wall Street, believe it or not, mortgage-backed securities by a guy named Lou Ranieri, who was on the board of the Environmental Defense Fund, and proposed this idea of pricing emissions on Bush 1, Clean Air Act amendments in 1990, and it worked. It reduced an acid rain problem. It reduced an urban ozone problem. It has not worked for carbon, except in one state, California. California begins their climate regime next month, and we already have a price for carbon in California. It's about $11.65 a ton, highest in the world, and you're going to see tremendous changes in California in air quality and climate change. We cannot keep consuming at this rate. This would be 2.5 Earths if we continue to consume natural resources. And unfortunately, developed countries are already doing that, and developing countries want to emulate that behavior. The system was not designed for a larger planet. This is a finite planet of water, food, energy, and unfortunately we're losing that buffer. So what can we do about it? Here are the solutions. The money to rebuild on the shoreline, in my opinion, is total madness, but that's where a lot of the federal dollars will go. The Army Corps of Engineers, believe it or not, takes 3 to 5 years, according to the mayor, to get a plan together. That's what they're going to do. They're going to dredge. Nature has reshaped the shoreline. We have something called biomimicry. We can learn from nature. And we have the potential to regenerate 10 billion acres of grasslands. And why am I mentioning grasslands? Because they're just like trees. They're our friends. They eat CO2. They're a natural sink for carbon. So Mayor Bloomberg has a program to plant 1 million trees in New York City. You probably see the little saplings outside. 600,000 have been proposed, have been planted. I proposed to the Obama administration to plant 1 billion trees. I mean, the reality is we had something called the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, and that's just what they did. So trees are a natural carbon sink. Everybody likes trees. They're green. And it's not a high-tech solution, but it works. So that's 10 billion acres of grassland globally that can be replanted. Carbon taxes, dead on arrival, really a dumb idea. It's just a straw man, as we call in policy circles. This is getting a lot of attention. Get everybody all excited like they're doing something in Washington. The trouble is we're not going to have new taxes on carbon. This would be the simple way to do it. It won't happen. And we haven't raised gasoline taxes in this country since 1984 under Reagan. We paid the lowest for gasoline of 38 industrialized nations. And it's a non-starter. We can go through Carter's 5-cent a gallon tax when I was in the Carter administration, Clinton's BTU tax. Obama really hasn't embraced this, but this, in my opinion, is going to the policy graveyard. The market drivers are something called cap and trade, something we invented. Here we've got 392 parts per million of carbon. So we combust fossil energy, that's oil, natural gas, and coal, and those emissions go into the stratosphere for 100 years. So today we're at 31.6 billion tons of carbon, and we have to start looking at this as impacting species, including us, resources, food production, etc. And the way you get it working is you put a financial value on that pollution. It becomes a financial risk to companies. So what do we do in the US? We make markets. It began in 1993 in Southern California, reclaim market for ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, acid rain, particulate matter. We have markets today for wetlands mitigation. That's preserving species as well as habitat. SO2 and NOx, carbon monoxide, renewable energy. This is moving forward in the United States. And so those that think we're doing nothing don't know what they're talking about. We've got 38 environmental financial markets in this country, and they work. And they've been around a long time, and they're getting bigger. So the California program, which I'll talk a little bit about, is going to be the federal program, in my opinion, when Hillary Clinton becomes president in 2016. And if you read the Times today, it's going to come out right back. She writes the book, she runs for president, she plays hardball, and we get cap and trade. Why cap and trade? Cap and trade was something the United States delegation proposed in the Rio Climate Convention Treaty in 1992. Ironically, the EU was against it. The idea is to give industry time to reduce pollution and bring in more stringent standards. It became the template for the Kyoto Protocol. It has worked. We do not have the smog problem we had in Denver, LA, many other cities because of cap and trade. You probably remember the brown cloud in Denver. LA had 180 ozone non-attainment days. It works. It's a long-term goal. The SO2 program goes to 2035. I don't know who thought up that, but that was a good idea. And here in the Northeast, we don't have an acid rain problem anymore. Unfortunately, the West Coast does, because China coal burn is impacting lakes and forests in Northern California, Washington, Oregon, and Western Canada. But the bottom line is, this is a solution that works. So where are we on our carbon footprint? Where does it all come from? Almost a third comes from transportation, the 250 million cars and trucks, not counting the buses. 35% from electric power generation. So as we burn all that fossil energy, it has an impact on climate. Buildings. This building isn't green. Most buildings aren't green. In New York City, there are 950,000 structures. About 50 are green. So buildings have a carbon footprint. Why is that? Boilers, lighting systems, we use energy. So this is the latest number, 5.6 billion tons. It used to be 6.2 billion tons. So our footprint's going down, but not fast enough. And frankly, if we do this alone, we don't get any impact. The largest emitting states are California, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Texas has the biggest footprint because they burn a lot of coal in that state, and there's no climate regime in that state. And we're creating the beginning of a Northeast market. Quebec to the north has a carbon regime, as well as California. So here's our carbon economy. I know people get very excited about cows, but agriculture is only 7% of the footprint. top line, electric power, transportation, industry. What industry? Cement, refining, petrochemicals, utilities. These all combust fossil energy to a great degree. There are easy ways to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency, hands down, is the easiest way because you're not making pollution. 27 years ago, I worked in the mayor's office working on energy efficiency programming with Con Ed and Brooklyn Union. If you look at Plan NYC, a lot of that is still energy efficiency. The only thing we've really done under the Obama administration is raise the CAFE standard. The first time we did this, it was 27.5 miles per gallon, and it worked. Now it's going to be 56 miles per gallon by 2025. That's going to incent a lot of innovation, but you've got inefficiency, both basically buildings, transport, and it's really cheap doing this stuff. The problem has been the United States has been blessed with cheap and abundant natural resources. We pay the least amount for everything. Renewable energy, which I teach, which I'm involved in developing projects in solar thermal, photovoltaic energy, biomass energy, waste energy, combined heat and power is getting cheaper. All this nonsense about no more cylindras, reality is the cost curve's going down, capital is being deployed globally. I'll just show you some nice statistics. Up, not down. This is from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Up 13% to over $280 billion last year. We don't know the number for this year. So we're not going back. So efficiency includes forestry, planting trees, called reforestation, capturing carbon, very, very expensive proposition, probably going to die because it's too uneconomic. And using climate-friendly refrigerants. I mentioned last year there's been a sneak through around the Montreal Protocol. This is a bad thing because they damage the ozone hole. This is called the Vattenfall cost curve. Vattenfall is a Swedish utility that hired McKinsey to kind of put this all together. If you look all the way over to the left, the cheapest is energy efficiency. And the first one is buildings. So buildings and transport, you start impacting things pretty significantly very fast. And because of the lack of federal policy for both greenhouse gases and renewable energy, we have regional approaches, which are what we have. 10% reduction of 1990 levels by 2018, called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here in the Northeast. It's a very modest little program. Carbon's priced at $1.93 a ton. Not material, really isn't going anywhere. It creates revenue that the governors of several states are starting to take away, was supposed to be deployed for efficiency. California, the most significant cut in the world. 25% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. They're well on the way to achieving that. We have the Western Climate Initiative, the Obama administration, and the Bush administration, the 17% reduction. We may or may not make it. We may just make it by switching to coal. But the game is to federalize these programs at some juncture. So we'll talk about California. And I was very active in AB 32 implementation. It was a 13-page law. Everybody always has to have 2,000-page proposals and laws in Washington. 13 pages. Very simple. 25% reduction by 2020, 80% reduction by 2050. Schwarzenegger embraced this. It was passed by both houses in the California legislature, and despite court opposition by some of the oil industry, it's implemented next month. This is the federal program. It is huge. California is the 12th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the nation. That's very material, and they have no coal plants there. And you had your first auction last month at $10.09 a ton. Where do these emissions come from? Electricity, industry, transportation. That's the top three. That's the top three, not just for California, but North America. Same problems in Canada as we have. So, and agriculture is a smaller amount. Northeast, RGGI we call this for short, something Governor Pataki had proposed to push the Bush administration forward on greenhouse gases. They didn't move, obviously, and it is a very simple little program that affects electric power generation. Very small cut, 10% by 2018, may or may not be met. International markets, we have the EU phase, which is called the Emissions Trading Scheme, Phase 2. Phase 3 starts next month, probably a 20% reduction in the EU by 2020. The push there is for more renewable energy and energy efficiency and less buying of offsets in developing countries. So that's a big change. And then we have the Kyoto Protocol, which is what all this talk has been about the last 2 weeks in Doha. And frankly, it expires the end of this month. It may be rolled over for a year. It hasn't been a great market success. Carbon credits today at the international level in developing countries are 65 euro cents, a dollar. And the idea behind this is to make it very expensive and painful. So it hasn't really worked. There have been about 5,000 projects, about 1 billion tons of offsets. I won't go into all the details because this is a 2-day course. Excuse me.
They just renewed it.
Yeah, they're renewing very little. The market's doing this. I'm a markets guy. I watch the price. Thank you. But the point is, very onerous process, very bureaucratic. Each country, and I've worked on a project in the Dominican Republic, requires its own regimentation. There are over 200 methodologies. It is an onerous process, but it's what we have on the international level. And thank you for that. So what is this green opportunity? Well, it's a big opportunity. And we're talking a $6 trillion industry called energy, largest in the world. And in my opinion, energy tracks economic development. You don't even think about heating, cooling, lighting, transport, but you need all that stuff. And particularly in the developing world, they need it a lot. 1.3 billion people do not have electric power in this world. They're going to be using energy. Hopefully it'll be a cleaner, more efficient energy. And how we transition to doing this is what the game is about. And we can do this with today's technology, which is more efficient, more environmentally benign. The first $1 trillion on renewables was spent through the end of last year. The next $1 trillion, according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is the best analytical service on the planet, will be in the next 5 years. So despite all the rhetoric about no more Solyndras and the failure of the federal government, money is moving into this sector, and that's global money. So people like little charts. Look at the trend line. Kind of flat, 08, 09, but it's up, up, up. It'll be up again this year, despite probably the loss of the production tax credit for wind power. This country is building 12,000 megawatts of wind power this year. That's second to China. And China wants to build 150,000 megawatts by 2015, just of wind. So that's wind, solar, biomass, waste energy, geothermal energy, all the kinds of energy that are cleaner, greener, and most have no emissions. The other thing I teach in my classes, they have a free fuel. The sun, the wind, the water, the earth. So this is the template I use for clean energy. It is much bigger than just technology. If you look at the information technology sector, that is kind of what Silicon Valley focuses on. Disruptive technology, not going to happen. Information technology, smart grid, you've probably heard that expression. And so several years I would meet with Kleiner Perkins, one of the biggest venture capital funds on the planet, and they would say, Peter, we've got 50 disruptive technologies we're investing in. I just shake my head, okay. And then Goldman Sachs used to run an alternative energy conference and meet them again. Peter, it's actually 37 disruptive technologies. Nothing is going to disrupt the world's largest business called energy. The point is, we can use better technology, cleaner technology, and it's not going to cost that much. Yes?
Could you explain smart grid?
Smart grid is basically enabling technology through fiber optics that can talk to your TV set, your refrigerator, etc., can turn off lighting systems in office buildings, can turn off computers. It's a nice concept. It hasn't really been deployed to any great degree yet.
Is it developed?
It's developing. But you know that the problem with many folks, they like trite right sayings. So this one kind of fly. Oh, smart grid compared to the dumb grid. And then there are smart meters compared to the dumb meters. The point is, this takes a lot of capital, a lot of time. The area that was really focused was Boulder, Colorado, to really build a smart grid technology base, except Boulder decided, the Boulder city government decided to municipalize the electric utility and buy it. They're having a lot of problems there. There is really no rapid deployment of smart grid. It's incremental, it's coming, it's a good idea. I work with Philips Lighting out of the Netherlands. I suggested a very simple idea. Why don't they make a really cute device like Steve Jobs has, like the iPhone, and put it in everybody's home and show you what electricity consumes. Kind of playful. And then people would actually understand how much energy they're using. They didn't use the idea, by the way. But I thought it was a good idea. It's coming. What I'm getting at is it's big. Another big thing. 29 states have renewable portfolio standards. So despite the federal government doing nothing, states are doing something. 33% of California's electric power will be renewable energy in 2020. And if you don't, and who buys it? The electric utilities. And if they don't meet those goals, they got to pay a financial penalty. So these are laws with teeth. Now here in New York, it's 29%, but we cheated. 17% Niagara Falls. That already existed. Yes?
Can you just speak to the issue of individuals being able to sell back?
Yes, not in all states is that allowed, by the way. What he's suggesting, some people put solar panels on the roof and they can actually reverse the meter, sell back their excess power to the electric utility. This is a really good idea. However, you have to have the infrastructure of electrical subsystems in place, as well as the regulatory scheme. In this state, it's the New York Public Service Commission. In New Jersey, it's the Board of Public Utilities. They run intrastate policy, but this is a very good idea. And what you saw in New Jersey was the second largest solar state in the country after California, due to incentives. So it's called reversing the meter. Yes?
Yeah, several buildings on my street had steam heat, and then the landlords converted it to oil, and now there's some talk of going back. But since the steam is Con Ed, how efficient is that?
The steam system is very efficient.
Oh.
However, the problem is Con Ed considers this kind of an orphan technology. They're not particularly supportive. They're not converting people to steam. What you are seeing is some conversion from oil to natural gas. Like the 100,000 buildings in New York City, including my building on the Upper West Side, run on oil, which is very dirty and causes a lot of problems, like asthma, which I now have, as well as allergies for other people. So there are things we could do. The city has a plan, but it's a 10-year plan to convert from oil. The steam system, you've probably seen these blow-ups where asbestos goes in the air. It's a pretty old system. Most cities don't have steam systems. It's called district heating and cooling. It's what we have. If you look at movies, you can see steam coming out of the grates. I mean, this is New York. It is part of the system. The better way would be to move to natural gas. It's a lot cleaner than oil.
Is it cleaner than steam?
No. Depends what the source of fuel is for the steam, though. If it's oil, then it could be. Yes?
I suffer greatly because people love air conditioning. Why don't, have we done what, could we do what Japan tried? Could we do what Japan tried and have office buildings up to about 77 degrees in the summer? Instead, mine is about 60, and it's horrible.
Well, I've worked in Japan since 1993. It's actually quite uncomfortable. It's up to 80 degrees, by the way, in Japan. So we kind of like heating and cooling. We like comfort more. And in some countries, like Singapore, you go into buildings there, it's extremely cold. Japan has a resource problem. They basically have to import almost everything. They have 23 terminals to import natural gas. They use oil to make electric power. We all know their nuclear problem. They have very little renewables. They just began a renewable program in July of this year. I'm not sure that's going to fly because folks like their cool buildings in the summertime, over cool buildings, and they like their warmth in the winter. The Japanese have a very austerity-minded or austere mentality. They will take that sacrifice. I don't think we will. This is the next piece, which I've called the microgrid, distributed generation. I've worked on projects in India, Philippines, US. Bottom line, small modular systems, cheaper, not billions of dollars, we're talking thousands of dollars. And this thing is starting to happen. I'm working on one in Ithaca, New York with Cornell. I proposed this idea in Dubuque, Iowa, which I'll be out there on January 8th. And as of last night, I'll probably be doing this in Cape Cod. Small distributed energy systems that can be used in developing countries as well as developed countries. A lot cheaper, makes energy, and we're talking kilowatts, not megawatts, so that's a lot smaller scale. These are smaller, cheaper, more efficient. And going back to the old Con Ed model, when Edison lit Water Street about 100 years ago, New York City was a bunch of little utilities making their own power. And they went bankrupt. So have you ever tried to figure out why is it called Consolidated Edison? It's the consolidation of little bankrupt utilities. They hate me saying that, by the way, but I said this in New Jersey last week, but it's true. So that's an old model of 100 years ago, making your own power. And you can sell some of the excess back to the grid. So the reality is, this works. The microgrid is a good idea because it's not going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And it has a lot of applications. So here's a nice pretty picture I stole. I gave a talk at the UN Foundation. I like this picture. There's your windmill, there's your solar collectors, there's your anaerobic digestion. These things are not futuristic. This can be deployed today. We're talking about doing fuel cells, anaerobic digestion, taking manure, turning it into a biogas which turns a turbine. This is being done all over the world. I was involved in a project in the Philippines. A friend of mine, Prabhu Dayal, did 20 of these projects. They create carbon credits. There are lower emissions. That's where we can go. And this is what I'm probably going to be working on up in Ithaca, Cape Cod, and Dubuque. Simple technology that works, integrated system, lower pollution. I'm kind of excited about Iowa because they got a lot of cows out there and pigs and chickens and everything, so we can really use that waste stream. Yes?
How is it going to be applied to Cape Cod?
How is it going?
It's just started yesterday. Long story short, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce is going to convene a meeting. I don't know yet. Oh, I know. Well, it's like Ghostbusters. Who are they going to call? So they asked me to come up there, so we'll see. But they're looking at the same idea of the microgrid.
It's when all our lines are above ground and we're wiped out for this storm.
I know. That's another big problem, including in the city.
You just put us on microgrid.
Microgrid.
Individual people, companies,
Okay, it really depends on the locale. It's probably going to be municipal agencies. In the United States, there are over 3,000 municipal utilities. You probably don't know that. We have a lot of city-owned utilities. We actually have only about 100 investor-owned utilities, private utilities. And most is public power. And so there is a great opportunity with municipal bonds to do this. However, the key is you can do this in developing countries as well, as those 1.3 billion people don't have power either. So in India, we were doing something very simple. Solar collector, battery, LED lamp. We did that for 25,000 families. We took the kerosene wicker lamp out of their hut and moved it over to clean energy. It's called the bottom of the pyramid. From that basis, you can do telecommunications, clean water, e-learning. We were providing about 5 hours in the evening of light. Very simple technology. It doesn't have to be high-tech to be very low-tech. You've probably read about the solar lantern. Same idea.
Can you expand on the role that garbage will take in renewable energy, or can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there are some practical things and there's some impractical things. We only recycle 3 to 5% of our organic waste in New York City. It's pretty poor. So that's one thing we could do. However, we also spend up to $70 a ton to move the garbage away. So I don't foresee waste-to-energy plants in the city, although I'm looking at some very low-emission waste-to-energy plants, some based on German technology that's a lot cleaner. Not sure that's going to happen in New York. I think we'll have too many NIMBY issues. But composting is not impractical in New York City. It's just not going to happen. But we can start looking at organic waste. If you're very interested in this, there's a nonprofit NGO called Global Green, which has been extremely proactive on recycling waste streams in the city. And they've been looking also at that anaerobic digestion I was just describing for organic waste. So the thinking is getting better.
Cap and trade. To me, cap should be, why doesn't every country cap their emissions and keep it for themselves? You know, because of course Texas caps its emissions and keeps it for itself. And then we develop technology to trade the scientific know-how on how to do that. Wouldn't that be the better cap and trade?
Well, the idea, first of all, Texas is not a nation, so they can't do that. They can't write international treaty. Only the U.S. Senate can write international treaty. The idea behind cap and trade was there'd be emissions cap for the developed world, the OECD. But for the developing world, it's really it's not fair, to be blunt, because they do not make most of the global emissions. The idea behind the Kyoto Protocol was to basically pay for carbon offsets for cleaner energy technology in the developing world, because the rich countries basically have the money to pay for that. What's going to shift, though, next year is the EU, which bought most of those emissions credits, is not going to be buying those emissions credits. So it's a lot more complex. I think Kyoto was a noble effort. Trying to get a consensus of 195 nations is very, very difficult. You have many disconnects within the Kyoto world, even between developing countries. So it's not that simple. Yes?
Actually, my question was, if the United States can make a missile defense system in order that, you know, missiles don't hit us, like missiles don't hit Israel, if you can do something like that, why don't you do the same thing for, you know, for horrible stuff that we pass around?
Because the Senate didn't vote on it, that's why. I have no influence over the senators that did not want to vote on carbon emissions in the summer of 2010. And frankly, this issue wasn't even in the presidential campaign until Mayor Bloomberg brought it up at the last minute. So I don't see any votes for cap and trade in the United States in this Obama II administration. There's no, first of all, the House is full of the Tea Party, so they're not going to go for it. And they also rebranded it cap and tax, by the way. And secondly, we didn't have the votes. If you want to talk about disgust, I worked 20 years on legislation for cap and trade, and we didn't even have a vote in the Senate 2.5 years ago. So I don't see any political will in Congress.
Did you discuss previously on response of natural gas and the conversion of gas stations as it were, and transportation over to that? What the feasibility, the rollout? Because we're in a position to basically sell our natural gas, liquid natural gas around the world at much higher prices. What do you see perspective?
Yeah, I actually co-wrote the first environmental impact statement on liquefied natural gas. He's talking about safety and siting in 1978. I don't see the United States exporting a lot of natural gas. I think this is just a lot of hoopla. 5 years ago, we were going to build 40 receiving terminals. Now we're going to be exporting. No, we're not going to be exporting because you're going into global gas markets with long-term supply contracts. And we're not going to build a plant on the West Coast. The Asian market is where the growth for LNG will be. And you start talking about costs. I was in dialogue with Tata Power out of Delhi. They were talking about delivered cost of gas, $14, $16 an MMBTU. The bottom line is we have a problem called stranded natural gas. Talking about transportation, there's about 130,000 vehicles that run on natural gas in this country. There's a big opportunity to start moving fleet vehicles, garbage trucks, buses into compressed natural gas. But the bottom line, it's chicken and the egg, it's called infrastructure. So there's a lot of talk, like the Pickens plan, because Pickens has a lot of natural gas reserves. The reality is building this stuff takes time. And right now, we use natural gas mostly for power generation. That is the wintertime and the summertime. So in the spring and fall, which we call the shoulder period, we have a lot of excess supply. It's extremely cheap. A lot of consultants and lawyers are going to make a lot of money on these waiting for Godot export facilities. The reality is not going to happen in a very big way because you're going into global gas markets, and I've worked on a number of these projects. Japan, as I mentioned, 22 receiving terminals. We export gas from Alaska to Japan, by the way. We've been doing that for over 30 years.
But considering the long rollout, I mean, it all can be done. LNG plants take 60 engineers, 2 years just to come up with plans.
And $10 to $12 billion.
If we start now, certainly with a huge rollout over a decade.
Why would people buy U.S. gas over Qatari gas, over Norwegian gas, over Russian gas, over Algerian gas, over Malaysian gas, over Australian gas? The gas supply in the world is huge, and they're under a long-term contract. This is silly thinking. I mean, the reality is this is something that gets people excited. We have this gas resource base. It may be 400 years and we can export gas. I don't want this to be a gas talk. The reality is, we can talk offline. I just see a lot of hoopla. It's a very expensive proposition to take natural gas and liquefy it to 1/600th of its volume and then export it. We don't have that technology. You got to build it. Other solutions, the MIDI turbine. This is something I'm working on. 5 kW. It makes electric power. It makes heating. It makes cooling. It looks like a little toaster oven, 2x3. This small is beautiful. We can do this kind of thing. And this technology can be used for cell towers. This could be used for homes. This can be used for businesses. This can be used for first responders. That's a breakthrough technology. That's something interesting. So Sandy's impacts. This is just some of the stuff from the mayor's breakfast on Thursday. 95% of the copper wires in Lower Manhattan were destroyed. The damage of this storm is much worse than the politicians want to let on. It's hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity. Backup generators were going to lose power at municipal buildings due to fuel supply within 8 hours. This is on the Wednesday of the storm. FEMA flood maps are from 1983 and need updating. All major infrastructure failed in this city. Telecommunications, energy, gas and electric, hot water. Water levels of the battery are up 14 feet. We're talking about 2.5-foot rise by 2050. This is from the mayor's map. Mayor Bloomberg said there'll be a major new course to refine the future of New York City. The thinking is very poor. They're going to try to do something very quickly, which is ridiculous. We got to think long term. So what are the opportunities? I'm a big fan of the floodgates. London has them. $15 billion is pocket change. And people say, well, you're pushing water around. So be it. Con Ed could build something. They're putting $250 million. They didn't say for what, for rebuilding. That was another announcement last Thursday. Backup power for fuel cells, for cell towers. The Wi-Fi network is needed for first responders. Backup power. The good news is there's at least a focus on this. The bad news is the folks that are planning this is interagency task force, bad thinking, rush to rebuild, and I just think we're going to have more storms. Yes, in the back.
Can you explain the floodgates?
Yeah, the floodgates are basically a barrier. The Verrazano Narrows, the Staten Island, and I forget what the third one is, to keep water surge from flooding Lower Manhattan. You know, we have a lot of landfill in Lower Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. We've got real problems. Sea level rise has already been 1 foot, and we're talking another 2.5 feet.
So what is this? Is the big gate that
Yeah, it's a big gate.
at the bottom of the ocean? And
No, it keeps the surge from coming into the harbor, basically. But Stamford, Connecticut has one, by the way, since 1969. You know, we can get 90% funding from the federal government right now. So we're not ready for the next storm. And I also have been thinking, we need a civil defense for climate change. Don't laugh, we need to be prepared. We're not prepared for climate change. And these storms are going to get worse. 1,000-mile storms, when Katrina was only 300 miles, this is a problem. They're going to get more intense and worse. So here's the green future. This is where I've got my hope. Yes, go ahead.
The gates long enough to sustain.
Yes. Yeah. Would the gates be strong enough to sustain the surge?
Would the gates be strong enough to sustain the surge?
Yes. Engineers can do this stuff. Look, I'm just telling you my anecdotal information. 52% of the world's population under 30. Green people are young people. They get it. They want to do it. And we're recovering, in my opinion, from a 10-year depression. So we're in year 5 of that. So Cecile Churchill, it's the end of the beginning. Climate change is material, and business and government must respond. It's technology and engineering solutions. Emissions trading, cap and trade is only a facilitator. And the bottom line, it's going to cost more for a cleaner environment. So let's switch gears from government and business to what you guys can do and your families. There are things you can do. You can buy CFL or LED lamps. You may think it's picayune, but the reality is you start deploying hundreds of millions of these bulbs, you're going to save a lot of energy. And in California, it's called online billing. So an 8-month payback, you don't even have to do anything. You already paid for the bulb that could last 10 to 20 years. So the bottom line is LED lamps could be very interesting. People laugh about this one. Inflate your tires. You could save 500,000 barrels of oil by keeping your tires inflated. At Carnegie Mellon, because I ran a seminar here in the city, they actually went outside the parking lot and checked on everybody's tires, and most were underinflated or overinflated. This is simple stuff. Turn off your lights and computers. People don't do that. Buy a hybrid or share a car. I use Zipcar myself, and I usually use a hybrid or an EV. Invest in energy conservation. Buy locally grown food from farmers markets called locavore movement. It's right here from the Hudson Valley. If you look at the supply chain and why are we getting grapes from Chile, you know, think about how expensive it is and the emissions footprint. Buy green energy. I'm not a shrill for green power, Green Mountain Power, but you can buy green power on your bill. Yes, you did. Okay. Planting trees, the simplest thing possible. As I said, the city has planted at 600,000. I left the zero off. It's about $1,000 a tree, by the way. It's not cheap to plant a tree in New York City for some reason. $1,000 a tree. Purchase greenhouse gas credits. So I produced my carbon footprint for 16 years. I have a carbon footprint of about 24 metric tons. Most of that is air travel because I don't own a car. And there are carbon calculators you can get on the internet. Buy certified green products and appliances. Check out Green Seal, another NGO, non-governmental organization. Invest in socially responsible investment. There's about $60 billion now in impact investing and about $2 trillion in companies that are now screening for environment, social, and governance. So you can have your 401k or IRA in these kind of funds. It's a growing asset class. It's not huge. And you can improve environment and energy education at all levels. Continuing ed at school. I'm the only renewable course in New York City. It's kind of ridiculous at the graduate school level. We're all in this together. I'd be very happy to answer questions. I'd be very happy to give you the presentation if you'd like it. Just give me, get my card or an email. My game is we have to have the building blocks and the stamina to realize that, one, we can put pressure on politicians, and two, we can do things ourselves. So it's not either or, it's both. Because this is a problem that's not going away.
Can you tell me what those big cylinders of liquid nitrogen are for? In India, we use them for artificial insemination. What do you use it for here?
I have no idea.
Cool the cable.
Sorry?
Cool the cable. Underground.
Thank you.
Would you describe a green building? What is a green building?
Well, a green building, you mean a new construction or a retrofit? Oh,
What do you do? What's a green building?
a green building has something that the U.S. Green Building Council does something called LEED certification. So what does that mean? Lighting systems, which are about 40% of building load. Lighting, for example, actually creates heat. So if you use LED lamps, there is no heat, so that reduces your heating and cooling. Your HVAC system, which is your heating and ventilation and air conditioning system, are two things. For elevators, you can use something called variable speed drive motors. You can use something called energy management systems to turn off lights, to turn off computers. I don't know if you've ever been to a bathroom. There's something called occupancy sensors and motion detectors that go off when no one's there and then go on when you're there. So basically, there's a number of points that are given by U.S. Green Building Council. There are about 3,000 plus LEED certified auditors in New York City. Here's the problem. So you got 3,000 auditors and you got 50 green buildings. It's a little bit of a disconnect. And it costs more. There's somebody in the front.
What about, is there a plan in the city to support green roofs?
Actually, yes. A couple of things. The mayor was very instrumental with Al Gore in publicizing painting rooftops white. It's a really good idea, and it's a really simple solution, but they don't absorb as much heat. Now, the green roof you're describing, I assume, is growing food or plants. That you have to worry about roof structure. Some of these roofs cannot support green roofing, but it's still a good idea, and some cities like Chicago are a little more proactive than we are.
I've read that the companies that are responsible for the cloud, not using paper, having our things stored in the cloud, they're all in the Pacific Northwest, Google, Microsoft, whatever. What kind of power do they use in their plants?
They use about 1 to 2% of all energy in the United States, and they don't all use green energy. The good news is, in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of hydropower. So that's cleaner, but I can't vouch for everything, but you are right, they use energy just like everything else.
You mentioned in one of your earlier slides, one of the things we as adults can do is to purchase carbon credits. Where do you go about purchasing them? And can we as individuals actively trade them? And then tell me, where does the money from the carbon credits that we purchase go?
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there. I was a member of the Chicago Climate Exchange, which is now closed. So I purchased carbon credits based on a carbon calculator that told me what was my, from Con Ed, what was my natural gas bill, what was my electric bill, how much air travel, train travel, etc. And that gave me a number, 24 cents a metric ton. I purchased credits for 4 years. I actually checked to make sure the offset was a real project. So my last project was a landfill in Illinois. Can't really do that anymore. What you can do is buy offsets for your air travel. I think all the carriers now have carbon offsets. I can't certify that. Can't tell you what you're actually buying. And similarly, there are other entities that are also selling carbon credits. You might want to check out Native Energy because they're very involved in carbon credits. Now, trading them, this is not a fungible commodity market. This is not what we're talking about. This is just buying offsets for retirement. So when I bought these credits, they were not used, and they were for real projects.
I didn't hear you mention.
Second.
Peter, what's the status of the floodgates idea that you described?
I don't know. The mayor was kind of poo-pooing it at first. I think it's going to gain some traction with the governor. I think we're going to have to start thinking about it. But all these solutions take years and lots of money.
I didn't hear you mention atomic energy. Do you see any hope for atomic energy? Are you afraid of atomic energy? And would you continue to accept the atomic energy setup as you can in New York right now?
Okay, I'm not afraid of atomic energy. Here's the problem, though, and I've done a couple of seminars with the Nuclear Energy Institute out of DC. One, we've got 105 operating plants. Two, we don't allow reprocessing in this country like we do in Japan and France, so that's a big problem. So we've got a mining issue, we've got a spent fuel issue, we've got a cost issue. It's very expensive. I've been tracking the Ariva plant in Finland, which is now behind schedule and over budget. So the reality is, with Fukushima, there's been a whole rethinking of this industry. Now, there's another school of thought that thinks, oh, well, we can build little plants, 50 megawatt plants, modularized systems. I haven't seen any built. I've seen a lot of people talk about this. Reality is, there are very low greenhouse gas emissions with nuclear power. The problem is the other two risks. And then you have the risk of terrorism, of getting nuclear material.
So how about Buchanan, New York, which is close to Buchanan?
No, you're right. It's right there. It's Peekskill, Buchanan. Entergy owns that plant. It's still running. The bottom line is we're going to have to figure out a way to get the 2,000 megawatts from somewhere else if we close the plant. We're really on an island here in many different ways. We do not have transmission lines. We can get a lot of power, hydropower from northern Canada, from Quebec. We don't. Because of NIMBY. We can get power from New Jersey. We don't. So we really have to rethink how we get electricity in here. And one of the ideas I thought about, because it was used before, is put it on barges. We could actually put gensets on barges during crises. The thinking isn't there yet. I met with someone at 4:30 on Thursday. I said, look, you're connected to the mayor and the governor. Let's see if we can do something. I have some creative ideas that they're not thinking about right now. The bottom line is, this is a long-term problem.
Yeah, we're going to stop here. Service is done upstairs. Thank you so much. I want to mention that the Adventures and Ideas today will take place at 12:45 in the chapel.
I have the same problem. Is there any technology that might solve it? Like we're overheating the world. What? Well, the thermostat is a building because they cost money. Is there any kind of thermostat I can buy that can get installed locally? No. There's no way to hook it up to an old elevator. Yeah, an old radiator. No. Okay. So you just no. I haven't tried it. It's a lot. We have the same problem. They're overheated or it's too hot. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yes. Everything.
Great discussion, by the way. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, mentioned that the city currently does not renew like the majority of what they can renew. It seems like we don't use a lot of recycling.
Yeah, that's a problem.
What has been the reason for that? Is there like a political reason why?
I don't think it's political. It's the economic reason that it's easier to just truck out our garbage or barge out our garbage when, frankly, this could be fuel.
Right. to the same thing. I mean, for composting, if it's going back recycling,
I'm sure it's a large use.
Is it something you could do, like, like a compact? That's very good. I'm going to do that. What about cooking oil, too?
Cooking oil they use for biodiesel. So some of the restaurants will have their cooking oil collected. We're trying some things, but it's still pretty small scale.
Is it? Okay.
But it's moving.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Working on Mexico, they clear-cut a lot of forests in the 70s. We're actually planting pine trees, which are not indigenous to Mexico, Michoacan, Mexico, to give indigenous people a business, basically tapping for the sack. So they take 8 to 12 years to grow up. The point is, it's not a bad thing planting 600,000 trees. I mean, there is a growth spurt here, but they do eat carbon dioxide. They're good things. That's why I said that 10 billion opportunity on grasslands. Well, we've deforested and basically taken a lot of the natural environment out of the planet by urbanization, and that's a problem.
And I was just interested in, what are your thoughts on where we're going in terms of the information technology, the data infrastructure around capturing information regarding health?
It's moving. There's this big movement on big data, and I think we're getting there. But right now, smart grid is still a great slogan. We're going to get there. But we really need to start deploying more technology in this sector to basically use energy more efficiently. It's still not there yet.
I'll touch you basically a little bit later to have an offline discussion. Thank you very much.
Sure, anytime.
Peter, I remember my question.
Okay.
Did you read the New York Times article on the wind farms out in the Midwest or West that had been heavily subsidized with all these tax credits and so forth? Did you read that article?
No.
It was informative and yet an expose. Here's the bottom line. And this is what I want. The bottom line was that all the investors, all kinds of wealthy individuals, and high net worth and this and that, received a 30% return for investing in all these wind farms. By the time you added all the credit, the problem is, to me, with our budgetary crisis, and clearly that's another side of the point, it's like a giveaway. You don't get 30% return.
No, you don't. But the bottom line.
Tell me what you feel. Is that what you need to incentivize?
Okay. First of all, here's the problem.
Yeah.
There's no more production tax credit next year. It's gone for wind. It expires the end of this month.
Okay.
I see nothing wrong with subsidizing renewable energy. We subsidize agriculture. We subsidize coal. We subsidize fossil. So why not subsidize renewable? The better news is renewable is getting closer to what we call grid parity.
Yeah.
Because costs are going down.
Right.
So the subsidy has jump-started an industry, and I show you the numbers. People are investing in this, and it's moving. And we passed China last year on photovoltaic energy. People don't even know that. There's good stuff happening.